The night my parents laughed at me in front of my brother's squadron, I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I didn't remind them that I had been in uniform longer than my brother had been old enough to drive. I just stood there in my dress blues, silver oak leaves on my shoulders, and let the silence do the work. Because sometimes the most powerful response isn't proving who you are. It's knowing you don't have to. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Harper Bennett. I'm 39 years old. I earned my rank the long way, from the flight line to operational command. For years, I paid my parents' mortgage when my father's business failed. I covered medical bills they never told my brother about. I showed up to every one of his milestones like they were my own. And yet, in my family's story, I was always the supporting character. My younger brother, Caleb, was the hero. Caleb was 6 years behind me, which meant by the time he was struggling through ROTC drills in college, I was already flying combat missions overseas. I graduated from the academy with a pilot slot and something to prove, not to my parents, not to my instructors, but to myself. I loved flying. I loved the discipline, the precision, the way the cockpit stripped everything down to skill and decision. At home, it was different. At home, achievement was loud. It was visible. It was celebrated in speeches. Caleb had that kind of energy. He was charismatic, confident, and when he walked into a room, people noticed. I walked into rooms and assessed exits. When he applied to Air Force ROTC, my mother hovered over every form like it was a sacred document. "This is his path," she kept saying. I didn't remind her I had walked that path already. I waited until she left the kitchen, then quietly corrected the sections he missed. Leadership experience matters more than GPA. Volunteer hours aren't the same as initiative. He nodded, wrote it down, never asked how I knew. That became our pattern. I deployed 4 times in 10 years. Afghanistan, Qatar, Eastern Europe. My parents learned to say, "She's overseas," like it was a vague weather report. They didn't ask what that meant. They didn't ask what it cost. When I made major at 31, my father congratulated me, then spent dinner explaining how Caleb's training squadron commander said he had real command presence. I smiled and passed the potatoes. What they never understood was that leadership in combat doesn't look like volume. It looks like control. It looks like choosing the right target in 30 seconds while someone's life depends on you getting it right. In 2014, during my 3rd deployment, I was flying close air support when a joint convoy was ambushed outside Helmand. The radio was chaos. Multiple casualties. Enemy fire too close for comfort. I diverted without waiting for full clearance. Made 3 low passes under hostile fire. Took shrapnel in the wing. Brought everyone home. The citation for that mission was classified for 2 years. By the time it wasn't, I was running operations back stateside. I never told my family the details. They never asked for them. Caleb commissioned 3 years after I made captain. My mother cried at his ceremony. My father saluted like he was still in uniform. I watched via live stream from a base in Germany at 2 in the morning. I sent Caleb a congratulatory message and wired my parents money for the reception they couldn't afford. When I transitioned from flying to operations command, my parents treated it like I had stepped down. "So you're not actually flying anymore?" my mother asked carefully. "I'm managing the missions," I explained. "I'm responsible for the aircraft, the crews, the outcomes." My father shrugged. "Sounds like a desk job." By the time Caleb made captain, I was a lieutenant colonel overseeing 300 personnel in a joint training wing. But when my parents planned his promotion ceremony reception, they described him as the first real officer in the family. I heard about the event through my aunt. I still requested leave. I still pressed my service dress. I still drove 3 hours to be there. Because he was my brother. And because a part of me still hoped that one day, they would see me clearly. The ceremony itself was textbook. Orders read. Rank pinned. Applause. Caleb looked sharp. Confident. Exactly what my parents had always envisioned. The reception was in a wood-paneled squadron room that smelled like coffee and floor polish. About 40 officers stood in clusters. I stayed near the back, greeting a few politely. My insignia was visible. No one commented. My mother tapped her glass for attention. "We are so proud of Caleb," she began, voice bright and theatrical. "He has always been destined for leadership." My father stepped beside her, smiling wide. Finally, someone in this family doing something truly important. And then he looked directly at me. The room gave a polite, awkward chuckle. My spine went rigid. Caleb stared at the floor. I felt the old instinct rise up. Explain yourself. Correct them. List your deployments. Mention the medal. Instead, I did nothing. And that is when the door opened. A major in a flight suit walked in, scanning the room. He froze when his eyes landed on me. Recognition hit his face like impact. He crossed the room without hesitation. "Ma'am," he said, stopping directly in front of me. "You were the pilot over Helmand." The air shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. My father's smile faltered. I recognized him then. Thinner back then. Covered in dust and blood that wasn't his. One of the men we pulled out. "Major Lawson," I said evenly. "Good to see you." He came to attention. And he saluted me. Full, sharp, deliberate. "Ma'am, you saved my unit." Silence swallowed the room. I returned the salute, steady. "We did our jobs," I replied. He turned to Caleb. "Captain Bennett, your sister is one of the finest officers I've ever seen under fire. I hope you know that." Caleb's face had gone pale. My mother blinked in confusion. My father didn't say a word. Lawson handed Caleb a plaque for his promotion, but the energy in the room had already shifted. The narrative had cracked. I didn't smile. I didn't elaborate. I simply stepped back into the quiet space I'd always occupied. Except this time, it wasn't invisible. It was undeniable. And that was the night I stopped trying to earn their recognition. I left the reception before the cake was cut. I didn't wait for my parents to recover from the silence. I didn't wait for Caleb to find the right words. I walked out of that squadron building with the same measured stride I used walking into briefing rooms, got into my car, and drove back to my hotel. My phone buzzed twice before I even pulled onto the highway. I let it ring. The next morning, I read the messages while packing. My mother's was short. "That was uncomfortable. You could have handled it more gracefully." Caleb's was longer. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Can we talk?" I stared at both texts for a long time. For years, I had been the one smoothing things over. Explaining. Making excuses for them in my own head. That morning, something shifted. I wasn't angry. I was clear. I replied to Caleb with one sentence. "You never asked." Then I turned my phone face down and checked out of the hotel. Back at my duty station, the rhythm of command took over. Meetings. Readiness reports. Personnel evaluations. When you run operations for 300 airmen, there isn't much room for self-pity. The mission does not pause for family dynamics. 2 days after I returned, I was called into my wing commander's office. Colonel Rebecca Miles had been in uniform longer than I had been alive. Sharp eyes. Zero tolerance for ego. Heard about your brother's ceremony, she said without looking up from her paperwork. I kept my expression neutral. Word travels fast. Major Lawson called me. That got my attention. She set the file down and looked at me directly. Why didn't I know you were the pilot on that Helmand extraction? I held her gaze. It was classified for 2 years. By the time it wasn't, I had transitioned to operations. It didn't seem relevant. It's relevant, she said evenly. Especially when you're being evaluated for higher command. I said nothing. She studied me for a moment, then leaned back. You have a bad habit, Bennett. Ma'am? You assume your work will speak for itself. Most of the time it does. But at your level, visibility matters. Not for ego. For impact. I understood what she was saying. If you don't control your narrative, someone else will. Understood, ma'am. She slid a folder across her desk. You're on the short list for Wing Command. Air Mobility Wing at Fort Mercer. 400 personnel. Strategic airlift and refueling operations. It's a step up. I felt the weight of that settle in my chest. Wing Command. The kind of assignment that changes the trajectory of a career. When would this take effect? 90 days. She paused. And Bennett? Yes, ma'am. Stop shrinking yourself in rooms you've already earned the right to stand in. I walked out of her office with the orders in my hand and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. That night, my mother called again. I answered this time. Harper, I don't understand why you embarrassed us. I let the silence stretch before responding. I didn't embarrass you. That officer making a scene. Saluting you like that. He saluted me because that's what officers do when they recognize someone senior. But we didn't know. There it was. The real issue. Not what I had done. What they hadn't known. You didn't know because you never asked. My voice was calm. Controlled. You never asked what my deployments were like. You never asked what I was responsible for. You decided Caleb was the story. She started to interrupt. I continued. I'm not angry. But I'm done pretending it doesn't matter. The line went quiet. We're proud of you, she said finally. Are you proud of me? I asked softly, or are you surprised? She didn't answer. I didn't press. I have a wing to run, Mom. We can talk another time. I hung up feeling something unfamiliar. Not guilt. Not resentment. Relief. The next 3 months were a blur of transition planning. I handed off my current operations role with precision. Briefed my successor. Closed open projects. Meanwhile, Major Lawson filed an official commendation through proper channels detailing the Helmand mission from the ground perspective. It circulated higher than I expected. Senior officers who had only known me as an operations commander now understood the full arc of my service. I didn't ask for the recognition. But I didn't deflect it either. Caleb called 2 weeks before my change of command. I was wrong, he said without preamble. About what? About you. I used to think you just got lucky. That you were in the right place at the right time. Lawson pulled me aside after the ceremony. He told me what happened that day. The details. I said nothing. I didn't know you were injured. I didn't know you made the call without full clearance. You didn't ask, I repeated, not unkindly. He exhaled slowly. I know. The pause between us felt different this time. Less defensive. More reflective. I want to do better, he said. Then do better, I replied. Don't say it. Do it. My change of command ceremony at Fort Mercer was held under clear autumn skies. 400 airmen stood in formation. The guidon passed into my hands. Responsibility settled on my shoulders heavier than any insignia. I gave a short speech. Direct. No theatrics. Our mission is simple. Move what needs to move. When it needs to move. Safely. Precisely. Without excuses. I will fight for you. I expect you to fight for the mission. Applause rose across the flight line. Professional. Earned. My parents did not attend. I had not invited them. Caleb sent a brief text. Proud of you, Harper. For the first time in my life, that sentence didn't feel hollow. Running a wing changes you. The scale is different. The stakes are higher. Every decision ripples outward. I mentored young officers. I walked maintenance hangars at dawn. I reviewed readiness metrics at midnight. I learned the names of crew chiefs and first sergeants. I made hard calls when needed. And slowly, my confidence stopped being quiet. It became steady. 6 months into command, we executed a major joint exercise across 3 states. Flawless performance. 0 safety incidents. Top readiness scores in the region. Headquarters took notice. Colonel Miles called again. How does it feel? She asked. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She chuckled. Good. Because the promotion board thinks so too. I blinked. You've been selected for colonel. Full bird. Ceremony in May. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 20 years in uniform. Countless flights. Decisions made in 30 seconds that could have ended differently. And now this. Thank you, ma'am. You earned it, she said firmly. I hung up and sat alone in my office, staring at the flag behind my desk. The record had spoken. Not loudly. Not theatrically. But undeniably. That evening, I drafted a short email to my parents and Caleb. Promotion to colonel confirmed. Ceremony May 15th. Fort Mercer. No embellishment. No invitation language. Just facts. My mother replied within minutes. We'll be there. Caleb wrote later. Wouldn't miss it. I read both messages with calm detachment. The difference now was simple. I didn't need them there. I wanted them there. And that changed everything. The morning I pinned on full colonel, the sky over Fort Mercer was clear and windless, the kind of sky pilots describe as honest. 300 airmen stood in formation on the flight line. The flags barely moved. The aircraft behind us sat silent, engines cold, waiting for the next mission. I stood at attention while the orders were read, my service dress pressed sharp, silver eagles resting in a small velvet box beside the podium. My parents sat in the second row. Caleb stood beside them in uniform, now a major. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering whether they would see me. I was simply present. The ceremony followed the ritual. My commander spoke about leadership, about consistency under pressure, about the kind of officer who doesn't chase attention but commands respect. When she called my name, I stepped forward. Caleb was asked to assist with the pinning. He approached me with steady hands. For a split second, we locked eyes. No rivalry. No comparison. Just acknowledgement. He removed the oak leaves from my shoulders and replaced them with silver eagles. The metal felt heavier than it should have. When he stepped back, he came to attention and saluted me. It wasn't ceremonial. It was deliberate. I returned the salute. The applause rolled across the flight line. Professional. Earned. I stepped to the podium. I didn't prepare a long speech. I never do. Leadership is not about rank, I began, my voice carrying across the formation. It's about responsibility. It's about the people standing to your left and right. It's about doing the work when no one is watching and doing it well enough that, eventually, they don't have to. I paused, scanning the faces in formation. I've been in uniform for 20 years. I've flown combat missions. I've commanded wings. I've made decisions under pressure that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. What I've learned is simple. Competence earns trust. Integrity sustains it. Everything else is noise. I let the words settle. To the airmen under my command, I will give you everything I have. In return, I expect excellence. Let's get to work. The applause rose again. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception inside headquarters. Conversations hummed. Handshakes. Photographs. My parents hovered near the refreshment table, unsure how to approach me. Caleb broke first. He walked over while I was speaking to a group of junior officers and waited until I finished. Colonel Bennett, he said lightly, but there was warmth in it. Major Bennett, I replied. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. I owe you more than one apology. I raised an eyebrow. You've already given one. Not like this. He glanced around, then continued. For years, I thought leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room. You never were. And I mistook that for weakness. I was wrong. I studied him carefully. He didn't look defensive. He looked grounded. You've grown, I said simply. He nodded. Watching how you command. Hearing what Lawson told me. Seeing how your people respond to you. It changed my perspective. I'm trying to lead differently now. Good, I said. That's the job. He gave a small smile. I'm proud of you, Harper. Not because of the rank. Because of how you got here. That landed differently than it would have years ago. Thank you, I said quietly. A few minutes later, my mother approached. She looked older than I remembered. Softer somehow. You were extraordinary up there, she said. I held her gaze. Thank you. She swallowed. We didn't see it before. Not fully. We were so focused on the version of success we understood that we missed what you were building. My father stepped up beside her. For once, he didn't joke. I was wrong, he said bluntly. About you. About what mattered. The honesty in his voice surprised me more than the words themselves. I nodded once. I know. We stood there for a moment, not hugging, not dramatic. Just standing in shared recognition of something that had taken decades to reach. Later that afternoon, when the crowd thinned, I returned to my office alone. The silver eagles felt familiar already. Outside my window, AC-17 began taxiing, engines rising into a steady roar. I watched it lift into the sky, steady and deliberate, climbing through clear air. My phone buzzed. A message from Colonel Rebecca Miles. Well done. This is only the beginning. Another message followed, this one from Major Lawson. Still the finest officer I've seen under fire. Congratulations. I replied to both briefly, then set the phone down. I thought back to that reception months earlier. The awkward laughter. My father's comment. The deliberate salute that shifted the room. That had been the turning point. Not because someone validated me, but because I stopped needing validation. I built my career the same way I flew missions. Focused. Methodical. Without waiting for applause. Recognition came when it was ready. The record had spoken. And it would continue to speak long after opinions faded. 2 years later, I stood on another flight line at a larger base, preparing to take command of a joint composite wing spanning 2 continents. 800 personnel. Multiple mission sets. Greater responsibility than I'd ever carried before. Caleb attended that ceremony without being asked. He stood in the front row. When the guidon passed into my hands, he was the first to applaud. Our parents sat beside him, quiet but present. Not performative. Just there. That was enough. That evening, as the sun dipped below the runway lights, Caleb caught up with me in the parking lot. Do you ever regret it? He asked. What? Carrying the weight alone for so long. I considered the question carefully. I wasn't carrying it alone, I said. I was building something. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. You're the toughest person I know. I shook my head slightly. No. I'm just clear about what matters. I drove back to base as the sky darkened, thinking about everything that had led to that moment. The deployments. The long nights. The quiet decisions no one saw. The years of being underestimated. None of it defined me. It refined me. And here's the truth. Being dismissed by the people you love can break you. Or it can sharpen you. The difference is whether you spend your life trying to prove them wrong, or building something so solid their opinion becomes irrelevant. I chose the second path. And eventually, they caught up. Not because I demanded it. Because the work demanded it. Respect once demanded fades. Earned, it stays. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by family, overlooked in a room you deserved to stand in, or forced to reclaim your worth without applause, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had a moment where the room flipped in your favor without you saying a word? Drop your story in the comments. If you believe in building your record instead of chasing recognition, hit like. And if you're ready for more true stories about standing your ground and leading with quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the most powerful move you can make is simple. Do the work. Let the record speak. And walk forward anyway.